I want to talk a little bit about language, and it follows on, I think, from what you're saying about the associated problems with some of this language and an inherent cynicism that's building around it. So I work as a sustainability coach and a trainer with Climate Kick in Europe, which is a public-private partnership. I work with individuals, and the language that we use is really, really important of how we understand it. It's become too flippant. We just throw it around. And that's the problem that I want to address here. So sustainability is a relatively new language. It's a living language. It's evolving really, really quickly, and it's changing all of the time, and therein lies the confusion. The environmental issue is obviously big. The social issue is becoming more and more part of the discussion. And there's another area of it as well as the economic area, but also the higher self, the kind of what are we here for, the sort of almost spiritual role of the sustainability discussion. And because it means so many things to so many people, I think therein lies the problem. And that in only, what is it now, 25 years since the first Rio summit, the word itself has morphed into so many different things. So sustainable in English might mean, continuity or going on and on and on. And yet we know that spent nuclear fuels go on and on and on, and they're not sustainable. So, this is the problem with the word as I see it, that it has these connotations. If we look at other languages, in Irish, in Bhuanahocht is the word for sustainability, and it kind of means more stewardship or guardianship. Now stewardship is problematic in a way because it implies management and that we know what we're doing, and it implies control to an extent. Guardianship is slightly better because it's maybe more relational and it involves sort of kindness and caring. But just looking at that, it's very different from the English meaning. In Swedish, and excuse my accent here, but hållbarhet is the word for it, and it means more balance. And we all know that the three circles of it: social, environmental, and economic, and the sweet spot in the middle that's supposed to be sustainability. And balance has its own problem, if you like, because it implies that we need to reach some sort of steady state goal where we will then be sustainable. And that isn't the way. It's much more a dynamic process if we look at nature and learn from nature rather than about nature. We would know that balance is a difficult term. So, this is the problem. And then we connect the words together. Sustainable development was where it kind of started from way back at the Brundtland report before the Rio summit. And development got dropped out because it was starting to imply the global north developing the global south. It is growth issues, and infinite growth and continuous growth is a severe problem for sustainability when it tries to marry in to the business model that we have. So when we start putting words together, we get these kind of compound nouns. And the ones I have here are not strictly compound. A compound noun is something like hand cream, which means something different to the two nouns that are. But we know of the term greenwashing, and I think your speech, Paul, referred a lot to this idea and the danger of it. And whatever about, the damage that does to the environment, I think the damage that it does to our belief, the cynicism that it starts to instill, is the real problem with that type of misuse of language, this kind of, eco-water or some nefarious marketing term that really just saps the goodness out of any hope of building a better future. And so other ones that I've come across in doing this podcast series, which are only 10 minutes long each episode, that examine the related terms and tries to distinguish between terms. But here's one: invisible water. And it's a term that anything that we produce, the computer here in front of me, the chairs you're sitting on, involves water in the production of it. And yet it's not immediately associated with it. And invisible water is a term that sort of refers to the amount of water involved in the production of a specific product. Another term is blue carbon. And again, we know both of these words, and yet we're not sure. And of course, the problem is you've got to put your hand up and ask, what is that? This is actually the carbon that is captured by the seaweeds, the kelp, the algae in the coastal zones and the shallower waters, and then they bring it in and lodge it and embed it into the seabed. And it's a really big, important issue in carbon capture, and it's a natural system. So we've loads of these compounds now that we're using and that have double the problem. Rather than just one word having a problem, when we put two together, we can actually get an even worse problem. We've things like social capital, which is a kind of a glue that holds community together and is very difficult to define, but is very easy to witness in the absence of it when community falls apart. Or things like voluntary simplicity, which is, the idea of backing it and not buying things just because you need to, the consumer model of it, but reducing our lifestyles to a more simple lifestyle. So those kinds of things are a hint at just how complex the language has become in 30 years. Language is a frame for taking ideas and bringing them into being. So we have a rephrasing allows us a reframing of some ideas, and this is important. These underlying implications of the language are important. I think that we've got this system where a lot of the language has been negative, very understandably, and I'm not undermining the environmental problem, but for a lot of people who aren't in the environmental movement, the associated language is quite negative with environmentalism. The kind of, oh Jesus, we're all going to die campaign, and it's problematic. It's right on a technical point that all of this is happening, and it's 200 and 300 years in the making. We've framed our language to almost be designed to damage the environment, and yet it's not a good recruiter. Negative language, and there's pollution, degradation and catastrophe and all of that associated with it, and I'm not denying it, I'm just saying it's a problem on language. In the neutral one, sustainable in a way is kind of neutral. It's maintaining, conserving, it's holding space and whatever, and again it's beginning to be problematic. Is sustainable enough, really? I mean, if somebody was to ask you, how your marriage was, and you said, well, it's just sustainable, it wouldn't really bode very well for, and so that's one of the issues that with that implication about holding, and then this idea that it's balanced, that there's some sort of ultimate goal for sustainability, that we can reach it and that's it. It's not as dynamic. So some people within the sustainability world, and I would say here, I dread the thought police and the politically correct police coming in on our language. I'm just really interested as a bit of a wordsmith about how this underlying implication affects how we talk about issues that are really, really serious. And so the more positive terms are people are trying to talk about. There's a regeneration is a term that's starting to be used, and that you have things like regenerative agriculture, which aims to not only produce the product, but to enhance the land, to produce the crops or the outputs. And there's an American academic called John Ehrenfeld who thought we should start using the word flourishing, because it was a very good positive statement, and he wasn't in the least bit under denying the problems and the issues that we have to try and address around sustainability generally. But abundance, nature is abundant. Economics is the study of scarcity. And so economics tends to grab negative language and hold it a good bit, whereas, in other spheres, and if we could look and start using positive language, maybe we could start to reframe the quest of moving towards sustainability. So if we take a simple term like natural resource management, again, we're getting into this situation that we're talking about nature as a management issue, as if we can manage it. And whilst we can manage perhaps the outflow from a factory, this water pipe here with the parts per million, when it goes into the lake or the river system, we can't manage that. There are too many unintended consequences. We don't know the complexities of the interactions. But by using the term all the time, we tend to think that we can manage nature. If we could just measure it, if we would just hold still for a minute, we could just grab it and then manage it from there on. And similarly, resource management, resource sort of inferring that nature is a cookie jar or a store cupboard, when in fact, it's our life support system. And, so this sort of thing, a simple thing like natural resource management has inherent bias in it, in the language. And it's not that we necessarily have to keep changing our language all the time, but just to build an awareness of how deep our feeling about how we're going to address this is, how embodied it is in years and years of developing a language around this. And I think this is a really important element in how we hold conversations for change. And a lot of people want to build a better world, cynical and all as the world may appear to be. We need to keep reminding ourselves and languaging this positive hope to build a better world. There was a great book a few years ago, some of you may have read, of Charles Eisenstein, on the more beautiful world that we all know in our hearts is possible, which is a really nice, snappy title. And it was a 400 or 500 page book, but it was quite the thesis on how we might reconsider sustainability. So I think that there's a kind of a simple enough twin approach. I think that inherent in what we're trying to do, the speaker needs to have respect for the subject, respect for what the audience, respect for what they know and what they don't know in this, and to try and focus on the clarity of the language used. That's a really important part of how we work on education for sustainability. And the whole idea of people facing speakers, addressing things in circles, in different types of social technologies, allows for the exchange of information in different ways. And the languaging is a really big part of that. The listener, on the other hand, needs curiosity. And I think if we can frame this whole S word in positive language, we can start to build curiosity rather than fatigue or learning to get a piece of paper. Learning and conversation and dialogue for change based on curiosity is really, really important. And the listener also needs the courage to ask questions, some of which may be silly. Invisible water, what is it? We both terms, but what is it together? And creating an environment of learning and in exchange that is really, really important when we're having these conversations. So in my years of working on conversations for deep change particularly, and even for businesses grappling with this about learning their value system, I think it is really important to try and provide a sense of what these sustainability values are. The big overarching picture. We delve straight into fixing problems so quickly. And I know, obviously, the busyness of business is problematic in this. What's the outcome? Where is it? How much does it cost? How do we measure it? How do we manage it? But when we're having these deeper conversations, we need to be careful. We also need to spend time sharing the meanings of language, so that we even in groups which seemingly are the same, I have had a friend over from America last week, and I was using the word rewilding, which in Europe means, returning some of the farmland to forest and biodiversity, etc., etc. And she was going, what? To her, in America, rewilding is a much more individual thing. It's like a Bear Grylls course you do of how to make a knife and how to navigate your way around the forest at night. And there was the two of us with a lot of sustainability experience, never having bumped into this different meanings for the same word. So I think that we need to engage with people also who can challenge us with respect and with courage, but have that challenge our conversations. Is that what we mean? Because the business case for sustainability is very different to the sustainability case for business. This is not just plain words with words. This is really taking language into where it belongs, the understanding just how how loaded our language is. Tomorrow is Bridget's day. Bridget was the goddess or the patron saint of poets who took vague ideas and with words put them into some more concrete frame. So maybe we should ask Bridget to be the patron saint of sustainability. I think the Irish have something to offer sustainability as we help to craft stories about how a sustainability future might look and what it might consist of. So, as I say, this is what I try to do in my work with individuals as a coach or with teams in supporting their moving towards sustainability. So, thank you.
Thank you very much, Victor. That's fascinating. I have to say I'm going to have to be a lot more careful with my words going forward. Victor has challenged us to be questioning. So in that respect, has anybody got a question for Victor? Thank you.
Yeah, I'm Donal McQueenie. I'm from the North Bull Island Volunteer Programme. Just wondering, it's really looking for a solution, I suppose. A lot of the language we hear about the environment is quite negative, and it can be very disheartening as well. But at the same time, we have to be realistic, and we can't just be, as as previous speaker mentioned about greenwashing and this green program when it's not actually true. So, I suppose we have to be realistic. So how do how do we go about that, I suppose, is my question.
Well, I mean, really, if you consider just how quickly we're learning, there's an individual learning happening and there's a collective learning happening. And there is a lot of learning that has gone on over the years. I think that so I'm not sure that we need to change the word sustainable, because I think the same thing will happen to another word. And we are where we are with this. I do think this huge problem of the greenwashing, which is a language issue. So I think we need to call people out on it, and the idea to say, oh, well, Board B as Origin Green will create sustainable jobs. What are they? Because they're very different to jobs in sustainability. They seem to me that sustainable jobs means a job that will survive the next recession. And that's not what other people mean. When I say it, I don't say I have a sustainable job. I say I work in sustainability. So we just need to keep reinventing this language, and awareness is the first point of that.